My name is Sam. I'm the Partnerships and Communications Manager here at Fairygodboss. And Fairygodboss is the largest career community for women. Our mission is to improve the workplace by increasing transparency. We offer a ton of great free resources like anonymous company reviews, job listings, articles, virtual recruiting events, and so much more to help you succeed throughout your careers. So before we get started, we will be recording today's webinar and sending it out in a follow-up email later today. So if you missed anything or you want to rewatch it back, you'll have the ability to do so. We'll also be doing a Q&A at the end. So feel free to leave all questions that come to mind in the Q&A box. You'll find it again at the bottom of your screen. And you can leave questions as yourself or anonymously. So feel free to ask literally anything that comes to mind. Don't be scared. Here with me today is Randi Braun. Specializing with women leaders, Randi is an executive coach, consultant, speaker, and the founder of Something Major. She has coached leaders across the Fortune 500 and is a thought leader who has been featured by Forbes, The Washington Post, and Parents Magazine, speaking frequently on the topics of women's professional development and leadership, business development, thriving in working parenthood, and building meaningful professional relationships. Thanks so much for being here today, Randi. Over to you. Oh, you're muted.
There we go. Nothing
You're all
like
good.
Starting a conversation with a mute fail. Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you, Fairygodboss. Thank you to all of you who are tuning in. This is really a pleasure for me. I write for Fairygodboss, and so when Sam and the team invited me to do this webinar, was really excited to spend time with you all. So thank you for spending your lunch with me. As Sam mentioned, we'll be spending our time today really focusing on thriving while remote, how you can manage your team while you're working from home. So I assume here that every person is a manager or a people leader or a team leader in some capacity. So our conversation will really be focused on how, as a manager, you can thrive remote both as an individual, but also as a team leader to enable the performance of your team during this remote time. I think that we can all agree in this COVID-19 world, we just are not in Kansas anymore. So even if you used to work remotely or your company has a really flexible policy or some of your people have always been remote, things just feel really, really different. And while I don't have a crystal ball to tell you how it's going to go for the next few weeks or months, what I do want you to walk away with today is a game plan for how you can win. Some tools and tactics so that in this remote environment that's new to all of us, we can all find out not just how to survive, but really move the dial so that we're thriving as individuals, we're thriving as managers, and our teams are thriving as a direct result. So here are 3 things that you can expect to learn today. Number 1, let's spend some time reorienting towards what this new normal looks like. I spend my time working with managers and leaders of all kinds, and I'm going to share some tactics with you that have come up in those conversations that can help you lead as newly remote managers. 2, we'll be going deep on 3 different tools for how you can thrive as a manager and how you can prepare your team for success over the coming weeks and months. And then finally, because good ideas are good ideas until we put a plan behind them, every single person today will walk away with their own blueprint for designing their very own individualized thriving while remote plan. So let's start by jumping into discussing this new normal that we find ourselves in together. And just address the elephant in the room, we are all reorienting towards a new normal. And if there's anything I hear from managers, whether this is new-ish to them, like they used to work remote sometimes, or they've always managed a bit remote, or whether, you know, they feel like this is a big or a small jump for them. It's this. It's that the stakes feel really, really high for people right now. And what I'm hearing from managers are things like this. I'm really worried about my own stress level and nervous about burning out. I'm really worried about keeping my highest potential employees engaged and sustained over the next few weeks and months. You know, maybe they live alone or maybe they're having a hard time. I'm also hearing things like, God, that person on my team, I wish I had addressed their performance issues with them 4 weeks ago in the office. It's getting harder and harder to manage them. So the truth is that there are a lot of things as managers and just as individuals that are really, really out of our control right now. And it can be very disorienting to really find what true north looks like in this new COVID-19 world. So as a coach, I want to offer you 3 questions that you can ask yourself at any given moment as a manager, whether it pertains to how you're interacting with other people on your team or just how you're feeling in your own day-to-day. And it's this. First, what can I control for right now? I'm hearing a lot of leaders when we do our coaching sessions talk to me about things that they worry about that they can't control. And frankly, there's not much that we can do to change those. But if there's anything that I've learned as a coach, especially during this COVID-19 time, it's this. The more we run to things we can control for, the more we're actually able to mitigate the effects of things we can't control for. 2, what's important to me right now in this moment? As in the moment that just passed a second ago when I said that. I'm talking about really orienting yourself in a moment of stress or in a moment of uncertainty to what is important to you this very moment. And then 3, as we kind of zoom out, how do you want to live your values right now? So I spend a lot of time in my coaching work when we're in a non-COVID-19 world, working with leaders to think about what kind of a leader do they want to be? How do they want to lead from their values? What values do they have? How do they want their team and their organization to perceive them? If you don't know what's important to you right now, you won't know what's important to you for the rest of your life. And so all of us do have a sense right now about what is truly important to us, and our values are really closer to the surface, frankly, than they are sometimes. And so I want to just pause here for a moment and give you all a second. If you're here with a pen and paper, or you're at home with your favorite kind of digital note-taking device, jot down these questions. And I'm actually going to pause for a moment and let you just do a little bit of journaling. And as we think about, some of the journaling that you can start now and continue, one other tool that I want to offer you as we think about what finding this new true north looks like in a COVID-19 world as you prepare to manage remotely for the foreseeable future. As managers, it's often expected that we have the answers for things. And frankly, it can be disconcerting when we don't. And so, some of the managers and leaders that I speak to, for them, the answers that they had that worked, 3 or 4 weeks ago, it can feel really disorienting for them that those answers don't feel right anymore. And so I want you to think about the journaling you just briefly started a few minutes ago and come back to it. Because if there's one thing you take away from this Finding True North section of our conversation today, it's this. When you are looking for answers as a manager in this remote COVID-19 world, I encourage you first to seek out powerful questions like these. When the answers aren't clear, these types of questions will help you orient to what is truly important to you and what you can control for, so that you're not just moving the ball down the field on what's important to you as a manager, but you're really able to show up for your people and help enable them to do the same. Any questions anyone wants to throw up in the chat, or any initial feedback or reactions before we jump into the tools? I think it's so important that we spend just a few minutes like we did, just reorienting together to what this Finding True North looks like together. All right, I'm going to assume that people are just still journaling. Sam, feel free to chime in if we get any feedback here. So when we think about how we can move the dial from surviving as a remote manager to thriving as a remote manager, there are 3 tools that I see really effective leaders using right now. And we're going to spend a few minutes walking through all of them. The first tool is this. It really comes to leveling up your communication. And so what does that look like? If I had to boil it down or bottom line it, it is this. It is own your message. And the number one thing that I keep hearing from some of the managers I work with who are newer, especially to managing remotely, is we just keep having issues with wires getting crossed, or I thought the expectation was really clear, or I thought I put the do not disturb message on my Microsoft Teams, so why is the person chatting me on Skype? And so as you think about 3 places where you can level up your communication by owning your message, they're here. Number 1, setting clear expectations. So what is it that you expect from the team, and what can they expect from you? 2 is setting boundaries, and 3 is asking really insightful questions. So I wanted to throw up a poll. Please feel free to answer. You know, I want to hear from you all. It's been hardest for me to fully own my message around which of these things: setting really clear expectations about what my team can expect from me and what I should be able to expect from them. 2, setting meaningful boundaries, either with myself or with my direct reports or the people who I report to. Or 3, asking insightful questions that allow me to connect deeply and meaningfully with my team. Sam, how are the poll numbers coming in?
Looks like we have most people voting. I'll give everybody 10 more seconds and then show the results.
And speaking of owning your message, if you hear any background noise, that's because my 2 kids under 4 are downstairs with my husband. Interesting. Okay, so we had some people say setting clear expectations, some setting meaningful boundaries, and the overwhelming majority, a little more than half, asking insightful questions to allow me to connect more deeply with my team. Great news. There's something in here for everyone. We're going to address all 3 of those. And what's actually so important, even though we segmented them out for the poll, you know, all 3 of them create this virtuous cycle of really owning your message. So the more you set clear expectations, the easier it is to enforce clear boundaries. And for example, the more you ask insightful questions, the more expectations become clearer and clearer amidst the team. So let's talk about and just back up for a second, like why this even matters, why owning your message is so important. I'll ask this rhetorically. Please feel free to throw up a yes or a hand wave emoji in the chat. But is anyone here familiar with the Korean Air case study of the 1990s? Malcolm Gladwell talked about in his book Outliers. Anybody? Haven't seen it come through. So in the 1990s, Korean Air had the most dismal safety rating of any airline in the developed world. They had more crashes than any other airline. And so people got to work studying, like, what was wrong with Korean Air? Why was it such an unsafe airline to fly? So they did some research. They said, okay, is it an issue with training? Looked into it. No, the training was top of the line, modeled after the FAA and other American airlines. Okay, it wasn't training. 2, was there a mechanical issue? Maybe they had the oldest fleet. Planes were going down because just the planes weren't, you know, good pieces of machinery. Also turned out they had one of the newest fleets. The reason that planes were going down, consultants discovered, was that in Korean culture, there was this legacy of very hierarchical communication. And so what was happening in the cockpit was that the first officer, who's the junior officer who reports to the pilot, would be communicating in a way that they thought was clear but respectful, saying, hey, boss, I think that there's an issue. And what they discovered from doing research and actually studying black box recordings was that it was indirect and unclear communication that was literally downing these planes, because rather than speak up and speak more clearly and speak with greater candor, there was such a fear of offending that people were literally losing their lives. So they did a great overhaul of the communication standards in the cockpit. And today, 20, 30 years later, Korean Air continues to have one of the highest safety ratings in the world. So good news. Most of us are not in positions where if we have lack of clear communication with our teams, it's going to be life or death. Though if you're a manager who really, really cares about your team and cares about your company, I know it can feel really high stakes when you feel like something isn't happening effectively, when you feel frustrated because communication isn't happening. And so I always like to share that case study about Korean Air, because when it comes to communication and boundaries, it's so, so, so important to have clarity with your people. So I really encourage you to take a step back and say, am I being clear with people about what I need from them and what they need from me? And I'll give you another case study, because this is one of the biggest things I see over and over in my executive coaching practice when it comes to miscommunication, is that bosses or leaders or managers feel like they're being really clear and the team just isn't hearing it the way that you intended it. So for example, I work with a C-suite executive leader at a big company, and she came to me, she said, Randi, I don't understand. I told my team I want really good upward management. I want to hear feedback. I want to hear the tough stuff. It's been 90 days and I haven't heard a peep. So we did some digging to figure out what was it that her team felt like they couldn't come to her. Not a single person had delivered any form of upward management. What we discovered was she thought she had been really, really clear in saying that she craved this messaging, but she discovered a few key things. Number one, she only mentioned it once. She never, ever, ever reinforced the message. Number two, when it comes to setting boundaries and expectations, she never told the team how she wanted to receive the feedback. So the team was left wondering, I don't know, is the best way to tell her over email, in our check-in? Should I pick up the phone and call her? And some of the people on the team were so afraid of offending her or delivering the feedback in a way that she didn't want to hear it, that they didn't deliver it at all. And what we discovered was once she went ahead and clarified the message and said, hey team, once again, I want to hear it. And I want you to email it to me so that I have time to digest it before I react it. She saw a big spike on people sharing feedback, and the team was actually able to use those pieces of feedback to really launch the conversation and talk about harder things. And so again, while I don't have the crystal ball for what your communication style is, the reason I have this picture up here is that neither does your team. And so I want to remind you, especially in this remote world where, sometimes you're on Zoom, sometimes you're not, you can't read people's tone over a text message. You have no idea what might be happening in their life in this COVID-19 world when you're not on the phone together. Really seek to go the extra mile in being clear and seeking clarity for them. And that's why the important question asking really can be so powerful here. So instead of just giving directives and sharing ideas, I really encourage leaders I work with to think about how can you use powerful question asking. Just bring you under the tent. That's a little bit of a life hack that I have as a coach. What coaches are really great at is not having all of the answers, but having, this whole bag, if you will, of powerful questions that we use to do the meaningful work with our client. So I'm going to share with you today one of my most favorite powerful questions that you can use to go next level with your team. And this one comes from Randi Braun. Many of you know her. She's the best-selling author. She's a PhD, LCSW. I call her the patron saint of emotionally intelligent leadership. And it's this question: what do you need from me? So as you're thinking about with your team, how you guys are going to manage perhaps a project deadline. Maybe you're one of the people who's joining here today and your team's actually really busy right now because you do something in healthcare or manufacturing. Or, I'm here from my house in Washington, D.C. We have a lot of people here in the city who are really busy because they're lobbyists or they're crisis communications experts. So if you're in a really high volume point in your business and your team, this question can be really helpful. Perhaps you're joining me from a team where you work in the hospitality industry or another segment of our economy that's facing a great deal of uncertainty and things feel really sluggish and slow and your people are anxious about it or you're anxious about it. Maybe you're somewhere in between. Wherever you are in terms of the mood or the workloads of your team, what do you need from me is a really powerful question because it does a few really key things. Number one, it helps everyone get really clear on, what the needs truly are. Sounds so obvious, but can be so powerful when we put them out. The reason I love this question for managers is that it does offer, some service on your part of you truly opening yourself up to your colleagues to say, what do you need, to your direct reports, but it also creates a real relationship around this. You're able to design an alliance about what's needed because when somebody on your team comes back and tells you what they need, it instantaneously and implicitly sets up the expectations for both sides of the relationship. So for example, if someone is on your team is telling you, I really need your help reviewing the talking points, it naturally creates a moment to say, okay, great, well, when can I expect them from you by? So it creates an opportunity to really have some symbiosis and get clear with each other about what you both need. And it also invites really easy boundary setting. So if the person says from you, I really need your support on this project, it's a great opportunity for you to step up and say, that's totally fine, but I need this by this time in order to help you. Or that's fine, but you can see on my calendar, I have 3 to 5 blocked out. So I'm either gonna need to receive it before 3 or you're gonna find it from me, my feedback tomorrow morning. So don't be shy to set the boundaries with your team members and with yourself. And powerful question asking is a really, really great way to do that. So in addition to what do you need from me, another one I really just like asking is, people say, how's it going today? People say, it's good, it's fine. Another really powerful question you can ask as a manager is, hey, Sam, What does fine look like for you today? And really just get a finger on the pulse of what their mood and the feeling is. So that can be very powerful. The other thing I want to offer, if I have any working parents on the phone, this is me. This was not taken during the COVID-19 world, but it's a great candid that my husband snapped last year of my daughter, then 2.5, actually doing a somersault over me. So if I have any working moms on the phone, I feel you on that. What I want to also say is when it comes to boundaries, when it comes to setting clear communication, when it comes to asking good questions and just generally owning your message, my one piece of advice, if I have any working parents on the phone, is this: do not apologize for having your kids home with you. This is not a choice that most of us willingly made. Frankly, for those of us who are working parents, we've seen the working parent life that we've painstakingly built over the last few years just kind of evaporate. And so I encourage you to own it, say, hey, I'm not going to be available most afternoons from 1 to 4. That's my parenting shift. Or say, hey, you might hear my toddler in the background on the conference call. His name's Dylan. Meet him. The other thing I want to say, if you're a manager, when it comes to owning your message, if you're not a parent, but you're managing people who either have small children, are caring for elderly family members, or have something else like that going on in their life, make an extra effort to own your message from them about what is it that you need from them, and really offer to them with that powerful question asking, what is it that they can benefit from understanding or getting from you? And really asking how you can support them during this time, understanding you reserve the right to set clear boundaries as well. Anyone have any questions before we move on from the owning your message and clear communication piece? Going once, going twice, you can throw them in the chat. All right. Tool number 2, and for those of you who are struggling to enforce the boundaries, this is going to be critical. I have a rule of thumb. I run my calendar. It does not run me. And if you think that's just a great idea, if you think that's something that's a luxury or a nice to have, let me actually point you to some research from Harvard Business School to tell you just how important managing your time is. There's a professor at HBS named Dr. Ashley Willens, and I absolutely love her research. I bring it to a lot of my coaching work and a lot of her writing. And she bottom lines this idea perfectly. How we spend our time signals everything we care about in life. I heard that on a podcast that she was on a few months ago, and I literally stopped in my tracks in Washington, D.C., because that is just so spot on. And I don't know about you, but this is how I feel. I know a lot of the women I coach feel this way. Right now, I'm so acutely aware of how I'm spending my time. Right now, I'm so acutely aware of how precious life is. I just had my first loss of someone I know personally from COVID-19 last week. And I'll be honest with you guys, that hit me really, really hard. And I know that I woke up this Monday morning feeling even more intentional than usual about how I want to spend my time. And if you're someone who's joining the phone, who's a manager, you might be feeling pulled in a lot of different directions, especially if you're someone who has the added responsibility of being a caregiver to somebody else. So I want to give you one really, really tactical thing you can do, whether you're super busy and can barely manage taking a break, or you actually wish you were busier, maybe you live alone and you're feeling kind of restless, as someone described to me last week. And it's this: take out your iPhone and literally time block your phone right now, time block your calendar right now. And the reason I suggest doing it on your iPhone or your personal device is so that you can actually see all of your different calendars at once, because there's so many things that you can do that are going to be really helpful in managing your time and blocking it. So a few things I recommend blocking time out for are these. When do you actually want to do deep work, right? For those of us who are just in companies that have an excessive meeting culture, it can be really difficult to have the time to actually do the work. And some of the leaders that I speak to, they're really having trouble setting the boundaries because they're either going to meetings, supporting the people who they manage, and then they're doing a lot of the work after dinner when they should be spending time decompressing. So spend some time saying, what are the meetings I need to go to? What hours of the day, days of the week do I want to be accessible to the different members of my team, whether that's up the chain, down the chain, or around my chain? And then when do I want to do things to take care of myself? I also recommend having what I call agility blocks. So during a crisis time like COVID-19, it's very typical for leaders and managers to get pulled into fire drills or emergencies. And so if you do things like put on a twice daily agility block, let's say 11 to 12, and then again from 3 to 4, that will allow you to have built-in time in your calendar to put out all the little fires that have come up. Same thing goes for work blocks to start and end your day. I've written this for Fairygodboss before. Actually, it was my most read article, go figure, on Fairygodboss last year. You know, this calendar hack completely changed my life. For me, in my own business, I set up the first 90 minutes and the last 90 minutes of my day to just do what I call work. So that might be answering emails, it might be writing, but those are the things that give me the flexibility to manage my kind of short-term emergencies with my long-term goals and projects. This is also critical when it comes to parents. And so for those of you who are managers, who are managing people, I encourage you to talk to the people on your team who are parents. You know, when it comes to time blocking, when are they on and off? And can they put that on their calendar? If you're a manager who has kids, does everyone in your team know when you're parenting versus when you're on? One thing that's working really well in my house, we're 2 working parents, is my husband and I each get a shift of the day. He gets 8 to 12. We're both on typically from 12 to 1 for lunch, and then I get 1 to 5. And my clients know this if they want to reach out to me. And all the folks on my husband's team know it as well. It allows us to really understand how we're going to spend our time. And more importantly, for the stakeholders around us, it sets really clear communication about how we're accessible. Anyone want to throw out some other suggestions for how they're spending their time or blocking their time in a way that feels effective, or want to throw out a question for something that's not working for them? Going once, going twice. All right. So just to recap again, the time blocks are so powerful because they really allow you to run your calendar. You make sure you're not running it. And by having your team block out their time as well and keeping that open on the calendar, it just creates for a lot more easy communication about who is accessible when, and again, kind of implicitly designing that alliance about what you can expect from each other when you're not able to just do a quick drive by somebody's desk when you have a question. All right, let's talk about self-care. This is the 3rd tool that we're going to cover today. And I argue that it might be the most important. Sam, could you pop our poll up for us? So if everyone could answer, I'm practicing meaningful self-care. Is it every day, every few days, at least once a week, or rarely? Want to kind of take the temperature on what the mood is for our team. Sam, how are we doing on the voting?
I'm going to give everybody 30 more seconds. Looks like we're halfway there again. In the meantime, we actually had a question come in through the chat from Kelly. She says, how do you manage when everyone else has a different time block? My senior leader are putting meetings based on their calendar and they're not being respectful of other people's.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, this is one of those things where there are a few answers. Number one is thinking about upward management. If this is something that's happening habitually, I encourage you to have a conversation with that senior leader. You know, make observations and say, hi, I noticed that we've, you know, scheduled this meeting 3 times and a lot of members of the team are having conflict. Can I suggest that as we look forward to next week, we have a regularly occurring time so that I can make sure that me and all the other members of my team who need to attend are able to do so in a conflict-free way. I find that when you're giving the upward feedback in a way that explains the issue in a way that's not combative or confrontational and comes from a place of why around, you know, shared goals, that's a really successful way to do it. The other thing is if you have a leader who's not particularly responsive to upward feedback, or you just don't think that would be received well, another thing to think about is, again, playing around with those things like the agility blocks. So one of the things that I find is really helpful when you have those kind of flex blocks on your calendar is let's say senior leader puts the meeting on your calendar for 10, and 10 is when you were supposed to work on a project or when you were supposed to have another internal with someone on your team. If you really can't ask the senior leader to move the meeting, you can go to the 10, but you have the flexibility on your calendar to move things around without having to push something to the next day or do something after hours to make up for the lost time. If you are in a client-facing role, Kelly, or if you're in a role where you work with other multiple stakeholders, that's also great data to bring to that leader and say, hey, I've noticed this is coming up a lot, and we're having trouble, sticking our meetings in the marketplace with our clients. That's something that I find leaders are responsive to as well. I'm going to read the poll results, but Kelly, I want you to let me know, did I answer your question and do you have a follow-up? So I'm seeing I'm practicing meaningful self-care. Yes, I love it. Half of everyone was every single day. Okay, followed by a third for every few days, and then rarely got 0, which is great. And at least once a week, we got a few folks there as well. Before we jump into self-care, Kelly, going once, going twice, any other questions I can answer about this before we move on? All right, I'll assume let's see, here we go. Yes, always a challenge to manage, Kelly. And I'll just throw out a resource there to everyone. There's a woman named Mary Abijay. I'm gonna type her name is right here. And she has a fabulous book called Managing Up. And she even wrote a Forbes article about managing up in a COVID-19 world. So if you wanna dig a little bit deeper there, Mary is a friend of mine, and she is the commensurate expert on this. JL, that's a great question. Sam, will you do me a favor? Can we hold JL's question to the end when we open it up for broad Q&A, and I'll make sure that's the first one that we get to?
Sure thing.
Awesome. All right, let's jump into self-care. Here's the thing. I am so passionate about this, especially when it comes to working with managers and leaders. And I'll let you in on a little secret. As an executive coach, I spend a lot of my time working with very senior leaders at the VP and C-suite level. I also work with some emerging leaders, so some folks at the director level who want to get to that next step. And what's so striking to me is that, without a doubt, this is consistent for me. The more successful the leader is up the chain, in my own experience as an executive coach, the more they are religious about their self-care practices, and the more they are unapologetic for the rituals that they have, because they know as they've risen up through their career and as they're operating at those highest levels of leadership, whether they're the CEO or the COO or the VP overseeing a 300-person team, is that to show up and do that role every single day and sustain themselves for the teams and the business functions, and frankly, for some of them, the sheer revenue that depends on them for the company, they need to show up fully as themselves in order to show up for others. And so one of the biggest myths I hear from people, and I'm hearing it alarmingly in this COVID-19 world, is that self-care is an indulgence, and when I get busy, I just don't have time for it. And the truth is that I think we all know this because we've all experienced it. Self-care is not an indulgence. It is truly a conduit to our best performance. And I wrote about this recently, and Sam is going to help us send out the link after our session today. But I wrote about 6 effective ways that leaders can practice self-care in a COVID-19 world. And as we're all dealing with the hardship of going remotely unexpectedly, our teams being dispersed, some of us have uncertainty in our business or are on the precipice of making really tough decisions. Some of us are the busiest we've ever been. We cannot afford to not invest in ourselves right now. And so for the next few minutes, I'm going to go through 4 different types of self-care that we can each practice, understanding that some of these are going to resonate with others. Some of these are going to resonate with you more than others. So it's not that you partake in each of these 4 types of self-care equally. It's about having an awareness of all of the options that are available to you. Because when we think about physical self-care, one of the common things that I hear in my coaching practice when I talk to a leader who's feeling burnt out or stressed out is something like this. You know, Randy, I tried going to yoga and it just didn't help. Or I tried going to spin or going for a run and it just didn't help. And that's because while physical self-care is really, really important, it's not the only type of self-care. So yes, as you're going about your day, please think about, how are you eating and drinking? How are you sleeping? How are you getting your exercise? One thing that I've done for myself as the weather gets nicer here, if you can see some green even behind me in Washington, is thinking about what calls I can take outside on a walk. So physical self-care is so important, but I don't want to spend too much time here because I find it's the first thing that we always talk about and think about. In this COVID-19 world, I really want to think about emotional self-care. It's so important as leaders and as managers that if we're not taking care of ourselves, we just can't show up for other people. So what I'm really grateful to see, and I wrote about this a few weeks ago, and I'm glad to see it's becoming a more mainstream story, is that this is a really difficult time for a lot of people. If you've ever had a history of anxiety, depression, addiction, suicidal ideation, eating disorder, this is very triggering. And one thing that's very, very important for us to recognize as managers is that people on our team might be going through very complicated emotional things. Now, does that mean that we have to be their therapist? We absolutely should not. And that's part of enforcing good boundaries. But we have to think about what we can do to take care of ourselves emotionally during this time. And one thing I recommend is to really moderate and modulate how much news you're taking in. My cable box broke 2 weeks ago. Comcast can't fix it without coming to my house. And I have to tell you, not having cable news on all day has really given me a lot of time and space to process what's happening in a more effective way so that I can show up professionally for the other people who depend me in a more full way. Limiting my social media intake has also been really helpful. And I'm off Facebook as much as I was before, but I'm really digging in more on LinkedIn, where I'm finding better articles and sharing my ideas with other people and watching them resonate, which speaks to my core value of service and impact, going back to our 3 initial powerful questions. So emotional, physical, we hear those a lot. There's also intellectual self-care. So I want to say to you, if you're a person who loves reading, make sure you don't stop reading. If you're a person who loves podcasting, make sure you don't stop podcasting. Or think about something new that you can do that uses your brain in a different way. Because we just don't have the same way to go to a yoga class. Or maybe you're not feeling the same kind of benefit from your Zoom mindfulness class as you were before. I have one client who recently signed up to take a Coursera class on Spanish just because she wanted to flex her intellectual muscles. I live in the heart of downtown Washington, D.C., so I'm going to let these sirens pass me by. And the last is spiritual. This will speak powerfully to some of you and not at all to others, but I really encourage you, what does spiritual self-care look like to you? I have one client who's very into meditation and mindfulness. I have another client who's been doing a virtual study group with her church. I'm not here to tell you that organized religion is right or wrong, or to tell you what spirituality means, but I encourage you to think about whether this could be a piece of the puzzle for you as you navigate some of the big questions. And time block it in. Every Sunday night, I sit down at my calendar and I think about, do I have time to exercise every single day? Do I have breaks to take care of my emotional self-care? And I encourage all the leaders and managers I work with to make sure that self-care is on their calendar as an appointment, especially my working parents. This is the #1 place I see working parents, basically selling themselves short. And if you, whether you're a working parent or not, and you just feel like you don't have the time, I want to share some of Ashley Willen's research from Harvard Business School. I mentioned her before. She and her team studied call center employees. These are people whose performance is literally managed by time. How many calls do they do? And what are their customer satisfaction ratings for the volumes of calls they do? And so they studied and they saw for these call center employees, the center employees who took 30 to 60 second micro moment breaks in between calls, their own little micro moments of self-care, had not just the highest stats for the day, they actually got through more calls, but their customer satisfaction ratings were the highest and their own personal satisfaction ratings were the highest as well. So if you're one of the people who feels like you just don't have time every single day, I encourage you to think about these micro moments. The studies out of Harvard and every other research journal show us that by taking small moments of self-care, it's like investing in the stock market. You have to pony up a little cash up front, but when you invest in the right stock, it quickly pays a dividend. So how do we make self-care part of the plan? I want to spend the next 5 minutes walking us through a blueprint of what you can do to leave today with your own personalized thriving while remote plan. And then I'm going to open it up for the rest of the time to Q&A. So, oh, sorry, I thought I saw a chat come through. So I promised you at the beginning that I was going to help you all make a plan to win. And here's what I'm hearing in my coaching practice from the women that I speak with. They had a really great system back in their office in their normal work world, and they want to rebuild that right now, whether it comes to blocking and tackling on their calendar, connecting meaningfully with their direct reports, connecting meaningfully with the senior leaders that they report to. And they're trying to build something really complicated and beautiful and complex in re-architecting this ideal work world. And it's kind of like building something like the Great Wall of China, right? Our ideal work world is kind of like the Great Wall of China in that it's one of the great wonders of the world. It takes time to build and architect. And so I'm hearing frustration from clients I have, or just from friends or colleagues, like, why is it not falling into place immediately? And this is what I keep sharing with people, is that you expect it to look like this, but many of us aren't taking the time to step back and actually draft a blueprint and then build it brick by brick. So we don't have time to spend the hundreds of years building our own personal Great Wall of China. So what I want to do is give you all a blueprint today so that you can build brick by brick in a much more quick and expedited way. And so what I encourage all of my clients to do, and what I encourage all of you to do today, is to segment. When you think about what it's going to take to thrive while remote and set your team up for success as a manager while you're remote, segment into 3 different categories: your professional, your personal, and your family and your relationships. Note that family and relationships and personal are segmented, because how you show up for the people in your relationships and how you show up for yourself, while those relationships can make you feel happy, we do need to segment them out, because for each of them we have different needs. So we have our professional needs, we have our personal needs, and then we have the needs in our relationships. On top of the needs, we also want to get aspirational. We have our goals, right? What are the things we want to accomplish professionally right now? Or what was a project we had going that we want to continue before COVID-19 hit and we're having trouble getting it back on track? What are our personal goals for ourselves? Maybe you gained weight or lost weight in this COVID-19 world. Maybe you're struggling to find that kind of emotional balance that you want to find. Like, that's a personal goal, right? And then what are your family and your relationship goals right now? Really importantly, every single day, what is something you want to say yes to advance your needs and advance your goals in each one of these categories? And as we round out what this individualized plan looks like, as important as saying yes, and Kelly, this makes me think about your question, what do you want to say no to? So really quickly, we just architected out, and I encourage you, screenshot this, take a picture with your phone. How do you want to walk away from today with this blueprint so you have a really clear understanding of what you need to have, what you want to have, and then what you're going to say yes to and what you're going to say no to every single day to make that a reality? So what I recommend doing is on Sunday night, and guess what? It's Monday at lunch. So do it tonight or do it over another coffee break you take this afternoon. Sit down and write out your needs and your goals. And then every single morning, what I challenge you to do is wake up and refresh the what you're going to say yes to and what you're going to say no to. What I'm going to say yes to: calling mom and checking in on her because she's worried. Or it might be what I'm going to say no to: I'm not going to call in and check in on mom because there's a lot of emotional work that goes into that. And I just need to focus on myself today. So I might send her a text message instead. This is all about figuring out what it is that you want and need, and what you're tactically going to say yes and no to make those strategic priorities strategic realities for yourself. Any questions or quick feedback to the blueprint before we look towards wrapping up together? And what I just want to remind you is that this is the blueprint, right? It's this document right here. It's the blueprint. And as you think about day to day, how you're going to make the trade-offs, how you're going to build brick by brick, that's what saying yes and saying no is. That's understanding what you're going to do to make the things that you want to happen and need to happen realities. That's how you're going to know how you can show up for the people around you, because you're clear on what you want and what you need. And when you bring that clarity to your management relationships, when you bring that clarity to your management priorities and responsibilities, it reinforces your ability to do things like own your message. It reinforces your ability to ask deep, powerful questions, to build rapport and understanding with your team. Because the more clarity you have, the more clarity they'll have as a result. I even encourage some teams to do this exercise together if this speaks with you, so that we can all understand what everyone on the team needs. And you're building a shared blueprint and able to help each other build brick by brick. So as we close off with a final thought, my goal for today was that everybody took something away from this, understanding that some of these things are going to resonate more deeply with you than others. And that's just human nature, right? Because as I told you at the beginning, I don't have a crystal ball for what's going to make it perfect for each one of you. But I do want to just bring you back to Dr. Willens at Harvard and her call center studies. And I just want you to take the power back and know that each one of you possesses the power to take these micro moments with yourself. Whether it's a micro moment of self-care, taking a deep breath between calls, going and taking a walk. I was on a call the other day with somebody who said, hold on one second, I'm going to throw on my earbuds and just talk to you while I'm walking outside because I just need to refresh. And I said, that sounds fantastic. I'm actually calling you from outside. So do think about what it is that you can do with these micro moments, even if it's about powerful question asking, like you're about to jump off with a direct report. Maybe ask one more question. Go back to that Dr. Randi Braun question. What do you need from me? Or go back to that question that I love. What does fine look like for you today? Those are all very small things you can do. And it's by taking these micro steps and micro moments that we're able to architect really big changes and really move the dial as managers in not just surviving in our own work lives as managers and moving to thriving, but really enabling the teams that we serve, lead, support to do the same. So I'm going to open it up to Q&A from here. And I'm going to leave my contact information out there on the screen with this open invitation. Ask me your questions right now, but also you're welcome to email me. I often field questions and emails after each one of these trainings, and I never charge anybody for my time to answer a question. So even if you want to hop on the phone with me for something you don't want to talk about here in the chat, please definitely feel free to reach out to me, or if I can be of service to you and your team. So Sam, I'm going to turn it back over to you to help us moderate the Q&A.
Thanks so much, Randi. And just a reminder to everyone, Randi's contact info and website will be in that follow-up email. We also had a question about slides. This entire presentation was recorded and I guess currently is being recorded, and it will be sent out, so you'll have access to rewatch those slides at any time. And I know a lot of you commented that you are going to fill out that blueprint for yourselves, so you can go pause it on that slide, take some time to fill that out. So please leave any questions you have in the Q&A. As a reminder, you can leave questions as yourself or anonymously. But let's start off with that question from JL. So JL said that one of the challenges currently is that individuals are scheduling virtual meetings an hour before the actual start time for the meeting. So they're scheduling a lot of last minute meetings. Do you have any suggestions for redirection?
Yeah, absolutely. So a few things that I always say are to kind of assess the situation. One of the things that we're dealing with here in a COVID-19 world, for example, I work with some healthcare companies. I work with someone who is in a crisis communications function. So for them, when those meetings are popping up an hour before, there's a reason that those meetings are popping up an hour before, because something is actually moving. So for example, I encourage you to think about, okay, is it a case of assuming positive intent where they truly just got this information and it's truly an emergency? If that's the case, I encourage you to come to those meetings and give that person, at least to a first or second time, a little bit of wiggle room for assuming positive intent. One of the things I always say about managers is our team has no idea what we're handling at any given time, same as it goes up the chain. But if you're finding, JL, that this is something that's really, really habitual, one of the things that might be helpful is taking one of the worst offenders aside and just saying, hey, I noticed that you're scheduling a lot of these meetings ahead with very little notice. and acknowledge it's hard for me or my team to come as prepared as we want to come because I haven't had time to think about the agenda. And if you're in a position of power where you can say no to the meetings or redirect even more kind of aggressively, one rule that I typically recommend implementing if you're trying to break toxic meeting culture in your office is setting expectations that all meetings must be set with an agenda within 24 hours to make them mandatory. So if that's a policy that you like, think about taking that to your team. It's also a great way to show leadership and show that you're looking out for the introverts and the extroverts on your team. I was recently doing a workshop inside an office for a startup here in Washington, D.C., and the head of HR raised their hand and said, we're having an issue with our team where we kind of have the same people speak up over and over again in meetings. How do we get people on our team to speak up that aren't speaking? And I said, well, are you sending an agenda in advance of the meeting with people, giving people the time to process? And they said, oh, actually, we've never done that before. Well, that's going to ensure that your introverts have time to process and contribute effectively. So those are a few different kind of angles or talk tracks that you can use. But I love the 24-hour with agenda meeting rule. And it holds everybody accountable to the same standard.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And I think giving everybody the time to process the information is just going to make your meetings more effective anyway. So it's really, truly a win-win situation for everyone. Okay, it looks like we have one more question from an anonymous attendee here. So if you have any questions, get them in now. Otherwise, we'll end with this one. But they said, I want to start scheduling daily check-ins with my team to help with communications. How do I go about this without seeming like an overbearing manager?
Interesting. So a few ideas. Number one, check yourself on why you want that communication time. Are you worried that your people are having a rough time and you want to show up for them emotionally? Are you nervous that the work is not getting done? So I would think about why you want to have that time. And this is a great time to show up as a manager and really be an individualizer. So rather than send out a mass email to all 3, 6, 20 people on the team and say, hey, we're going to start these morning daily check-ins, I recommend actually taking the time to make sure you're clear on the why for each person. And telling them as much, right? You've been doing such a great job, Joni, with these projects. I want to set up a daily stand-up so that I can make sure I know how to support you. Let's say you have someone on the team who's frankly been a little slippery, right? You could say, hi, Jesse, I want to set up this time to make sure that we have clear communication, understanding that we're not in the office so that we know what we can expect from each other every single day. So take the time to really be an individualizer and take the time to also really think about what every person needs. So, this is a question, if you have someone on your team who has 2 young kids and they're actually performing really well, I'd actually encourage you to give them a little bit of space and leave them alone. Working parents are fighting for every single second of work time available in the day. And those little check-ins, they feel really frustrating. So whereas you might think you might be offering this to engage the person, it's actually actively disengaging the person. So really think about how you want to be an individualizer. And then one other tip I have in terms of structuring your own time is think about setting up office hours. So let's say from 9 to 10 every single morning, you are completely available to your team for any questions and they can book a quick 10-minute pop-up slot with you. Or offering that, depending on your work style, at the end of the day or over lunch. So there's no one size fits all. I really encourage you to be an individualizer, think about what you need and what's also going to motivate and engage the other person on the other side of the conversation.
That's great advice. And Deb here in the chat wrote that she does her daily as a coffee connection, video calls to help each other be there emotionally. I love that. I think that's a great idea.
And I'm loving what I'm seeing of teams doing happy hours together. I'm loving teams that are doing group fitness together. So they don't pay me to promote them. This is one of my favorite services right now. 305 Fitness has put all of its workouts for free online, live streaming twice a day at 12 and at 6. And I know that teams are joining these workouts together. And they're funny, they're silly, they're dance parties. But the other thing to think about is, think about where fun is meaningful to your team and make sure you're not doing this kind of like mandatory fun that feels like a burden. I also encourage you, if you're feeling a little out of control of what's happening with your team, again, I really encourage you to check yourself. How could I be a more effective communicator? How can I be a more effective question asker? How do I want to use things like office hours or coffee connects to show my team that I'm here for them? So really thinking about what you want to do personally as a manager, because the truth is, especially as a leader, I would say people pick up what you put down. So if you create the space to talk, people will often take it. If you put out a feeling like you're anxious and you're micromanaging, people are going to feel micromanaged. So if you have something more specific that you want to workshop, again, my contact information is on the screen. Feel free to shoot me an email. We can always set up a few minutes to chat directly. Or I can come in and do a session, for example, for your team on a specific topic.
I'll have to check out that 305 Fitness later today. That sounds like a lot of fun. But thank you again, Randi, so much for today's presentation. It was really informative and helpful. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you all. I look forward to keeping in touch. Sam, thanks again for the invitation to come speak with the Fairygodboss community.
Of course. And I hope everybody stays safe, stay healthy, and we'll catch you at the next one. Bye.